Yeah, good evening, everyone. You are all welcome to this 29th issue of our Environmental and Occupational Health DigiConnect webinar. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this weekly Environmental and Occupational Health DigiConnect webinar series. Which this is especially meant for our industrial physicians, public health physicians, and the public health experts, occupational health physicians across India. And we all know that during this COVID epidemic, we all need to be well connected. And this is for this reason we have started this series, and this is the weekly 29 series of our AUSD DigiConnect webinar platform. And we all know that this pandemic is defining is the defining public health crisis of our times, and the greatest challenge that we are facing since the World War II. And since its emergence in Asia last year, the tiny virus has brought the whole world to a standstill. And we all, as industrial physicians, as medical professionals, we all need to be aware of the situation, aware of the epidemiology of the virus, and aware of the treatment, aware of the pathogenesis of the disease and the treatment facilities which are available, when to treat, what to treat, when to start which treatment, and when to stop the treatment. And now even this post COVID hollers, they are the main concern. They continue to show the symptoms even after the disease is over for many weeks, because of the destruction which this particular virus causes. And it is a very dangerous virus. And this is for this reason, Dr. Krishna Kumar, we all are connected across India, and we are an association of occupational physician, industrial physicians, and public health physicians across India. And um, today, our Vice President, Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain, he will first start with the COVID epidemic update, and then we'll have your deliberation on this, on the topic today. And before I start, let me inform you and pay my regards and salute to the COVID warriors. And this is for the information of all the participants that today our President, Dr. Gajendra Kumar, won't be available today because his elder sister, she expired today, and she won't be he won't be able to join today. And we would like to have uh, condolence for her, and pay our tribute to her, so that the whole family, they can, um, from our side, we can pay our homage to her. So we can have 1 minute silence for her. May I request now our Senior Vice President, Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain, to welcome all the participants and start the COVID EPID updates. And there won't be any questions regarding this update during the session. And after Dr. Krishna Kumar's deliberation, we can have questions with him. And you can put your questions in the Q&A box. We'll take up the questions. And sir, Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain, sir.
Good evening, friends. We today are meeting at a very crucial juncture where pandemic has evolved in India and has reached an inflection point. At the same time, I would say today's topic, which Dr. Krishna Kumar has chosen, is very, very important. because it underscores the need for alternative management techniques, technologies, and also diagnostics as well, besides vaccines. Uh, Also, in today's discussion, I believe Dr. Krishna Kumar will also lay the importance on management of critically ill COVID patients, and what are the therapeutic options, and when and in which kind of patients, what therapeutic options are to be utilized. So I believe that would be very useful and will be synergistically helpful to the epidemiological update that we are having every week. So in today's COVID-19 EPID updates, I would like to share two important aspects. One, besides what is happening in across the world and across India, what is happening in the districts, the difference between what is happening in the states and what is happening in the districts, the diversity and need to monitor the district and city-wise data and the trends rather than national data and the trends, because national data and trends are actually hiding a lot of problems which needs attention, especially during this time when we know definitely that we have gone through the peak. It is not only plateauing, I'm saying, we have now going on a downward trend for total cases, active cases in our country. So unless this trend is maintained for a very long time, the things may show what Europe has shown. So let's first go to the first slide, that is the WHO coronavirus disease COVID-19 dashboard. You would see here a very important observation. What you see is I've ranked it according to cases newly reported in last 24 hours. Now, if you see vis-a-vis what I showed you last week, new countries like France, United Kingdom, and Spain have entered in the top 7 countries which are showing the highest number of cases. If you look over here, 18,000 cases last 24 hours in France, 70,500 cases in UK, and 12,400 cases in Spain. And you must have also heard Madrid has gone into lockdown again. So we are definitely seeing a second upsurge of cases in Europe. And please remember, Europe had its first peak before India started having cases. USA is keeping up. There is no relent. Like yesterday, there were 52,000 cases, and Brazil is also a bit decelerating, 31,000 cases. If you look at the current picture of total number of cumulative cases, we are now inching more towards USA and going away from Brazil. If you look at deaths, we continue to report the highest number of deaths by any country in any 24 hours for the last now more than 3 weeks. Even USA is not showing that many deaths as India is showing. In terms of cumulative deaths, yes, we are far better than Brazil and United States. We are third in the world at the moment, but we have crossed during this week by a figure of 1 lakh. But if you look at other countries, they're all not lagging behind. France is 32,000, UK 42,000, Argentina 22,000, and Spain 32,600. The number of deaths, if you look at the kind of populations they have, is quite substantial. In this context, what Dr. Krishna Kumar is going to discuss would be very relevant. How we can prevent death by better management of cases. Next slide, please. This is a slide which is important. This is a slide which includes active cases in countries with more than 5 lakh plus confirmed cases, including South Korea and Japan. Now, if you look at the top, the pink line is USA, and it's ahead and above India. India is black. The black line is India, if you look at, and it is, since India started late, because day zero today, now India is into day reaching about 200, 190 days, so to say. So black line, if you see, it has shown downward, it has started showing downward trend, and not only plateauing, as I'll show you in the next slide. But what you observe, Spain, France, and UK are reporting massive upsurge. If you look at the color magenta, purple, and green, they are Spain, France, and UK, just under India, black. So what you're seeing, Spain, France, UK, and including Germany. Germany is now showing more than 7,000 cases. So these are the countries which are going to the second phase of infection, and the spread is now quite widespread. Even Ireland is getting affected, even Belgium is getting affected, which did not show that much infection in the first round of infection. Other countries in Latin America, Argentina, Peru, and these countries are continuing. South Africa is continuing their downward trend. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next. This is a slide which shows on the left active cases per million population, where Indian average is 666. That is, there are 666 active cases per million population if you say India as a whole. But if you look at the variation in terms of color, at the top you find Ladakh, which is showing 4386, the darkest. So in terms of active cases per million population, Ladakh is the highest. And then if you see Goa, and if you look at Pondicherry, Pondicherry is 3367 and Goa is 3064. So these three so-called smaller states are having very high number of active cases. Maharashtra is still having 2006 cases per million population. This is only active cases on the left. And if you look at Kerala, is also showing very high active cases. 2,500 is the number if you look at bottom left. And if you look at Arunachal, it is top right. If you see 1839 is the active cases per million population. On the right, the blue map of India shows reported cases as percentage of population. The Indian average in this context is 0.5%. Now, if you look at the color, if it is 0.5%, which is color from the bottom, second color from the bottom. But if you look at Ladakh, 1.7, Maharashtra, 1.2, Andhra Pradesh, 1.4, and Karnataka, 1.0, and also Kerala, 0.7, and Arunachal, 0.7. These are the states which are showing higher reported cases as percentage of population. So you can imagine the infection is now spreading within specific regions. And if you look at these places, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala are economies which contribute substantially to our GDP. Next slide, please. So this is the snapshot of last 24 hours as on today. 69.8 lakh cases, 1,07,450 deaths, 85.8 million tests total, and 8.8 lakh active cases in our country for the first time for after 3-4 weeks. Now we are having less than 9 lakh active cases. In the last 24 hours, 73,220 new cases and 929 deaths yesterday. First time, less than 1,000 deaths in 24 hours. But I'll show you later what it hides. 11.6 lakh tests yesterday, and average test positivity rate is still above 5%, that is 6.4%. Cases growth has decelerated to 1.06%, which is a very good overall indicator as a country for India. Next slide, please. This is important. If you see the 4 colors and 4 charts, which are from the top is highest and bottom is the lowest in each parameter. In parameters are confirmed cases, deaths, tests per million, and 7 days average of daily growth as percentage. Now, if you look at confirmed cases, if India is 73,000, 12,000 Maharashtra, Karnataka 10,000, Kerala 9,000, Tamil Nadu 5,000, Andhra Pradesh 5,000. Look at Kerala. Kerala is for the first time is showing 9,000 cases, confirmed cases last 24 hours. Could you believe such a small state is showing 9,000 cases? Though Maharashtra is showing 12,000 cases. Look at the size of these 2 states. Huge difference. So Kerala, as I showed earlier, if you see deaths also, Kerala is contributing a good number. Out of 929, 1/3 deaths are reported by Maharashtra in last 24 hours. Karnataka showed 114, Tamil Nadu 68, West Bengal 62, Uttar Pradesh 48, Delhi 39, Chhattisgarh 38, Punjab 32. So these are the states which are showing the maximum number of deaths in any 24 hours. Now look at tests per million. If you look at the overall picture, though Maharashtra is showing the largest number of cases per day, fresh cases in 24 hours, yet it is not testing enough. If you look at the tests, Indian average is 859.8 tests per million. Maharashtra is 682. West Bengal is 431. And if you look at these figures, this shows that even this number is an underestimate. They have much more positive cases, and because they're not testing enough, the numbers are, and even then Maharashtra still remains at the top. Okay. In India, highest number of tests are being done by Manipur, Pondicherry, Delhi, Kerala, Arunachal Pradesh, Karnataka, Jammu and Kashmir, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu. These are the states which have shown tremendous acceleration in terms of utilization of their testing capacity. If you look at the right orange bar, if you look at, this is 7 days average daily growth. Highest growth in our country is in Kerala, 3.3%. Meghalaya is showing 3%. Chhattisgarh still showing 2.1. Arunachal Pradesh 2.0. Manipur 1.7. Karnataka 1.5. Indian average is 1.1%. Ladakh 1.5%. Himachal Pradesh 1.4. Uttarakhand 1.3. Goa 1.3. West Bengal 1.3. Odisha 1.2, Nagaland 1.2, Sikkim 1.2, Madhya Pradesh 1.2, and now we reach the average of India, that is Pondicherry. And all states below Pondicherry are showing less growth, which is important. This is what India's, the overall picture is improving because of these cities or states below Pondicherry. Jharkhand, J&K, Telangana, Gujarat, Haryana, Chandigarh, Maharashtra, Delhi. All these states are showing less growth in terms of 7-day average daily growth. Next, please. Next, please. This is the overall picture for India. If you look at the gray chart, gray area, the overall curve is going towards downward side. The gray portion, which are active cases. Active cases at the moment constitute 12.95% of the total cases. Total recovered are 85% out of 69 lakh 3,000. So there is a trend towards going down, and we have crossed the plateau and we have crossed the peak, and we are on the downward trend overall. Next, please. This is again reflecting. On the left is the daily confirmed cases and moving average 7-day for India. It is showing downward trend. Right side is daily deaths and moving average 7-day for India. It is also showing deaths reducing over a period of time for the last now 2-3 weeks. Next, please. This is overall trend from March 19 to yesterday. Now you see the trend of lockdown 1, 2, 3, and 4 down, going down, and then plateauing post lockdown 1, 2, 3, 4, and now we are entering 5. So now we've entered a crucial phase where negative growth is there for last now 3 weeks. If you look at the bottom right, the trend is going below 0%, which is a purple line at the bottom. If you see horizontal line, and the orange line also, if you see, that is showing negative trend. Purple is 0%, and that is a very important phase in our infection for the first surge of infection. Next, please. This is showing states with 1 lakh plus cases, new confirmed cases, moving average 7 days. If you look at overall, India is on the top left, then we have Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, and Karnataka. So if you look at Karnataka, is still showing upward trend. West Bengal is still showing, and hardly any other state is showing substantial increase. They are either going down or maintained at the same level, except Karnataka, West Bengal, Kerala, and Gujarat. Next, please. This is all the states with less than 1 lakh cases, new confirmed cases, moving average for 7 days. In this, what you find is Pondicherry on the top, second left, and also Chhattisgarh is important, and in any case, Goa and Arunachal are important states. Next, please. Now we go to cities. What is happening in cities? This is new confirmed cases, moving average in Pune, Bangalore, Thane, East Godavari, Nasik, Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Nagpur, and West Godavari in Andhra Pradesh. So these are the hotspots. There are 10 cities with having hotspots. Bangalore, if you see, Bangalore is left second from the top. It is not showing any respite. Daily new cases continue to rise. Most other cities, if you see at the overall picture, they are showing decline in daily new cases. Mumbai and Chennai are showing slow rise, need to monitor deaths, and both cities have very high case fatality rate, which is higher than all India, as I showed you earlier. These are the 10 hotspot cities. Now, please remember, these are cities, not districts. Districts I'll show next. Next, please. These are top 25 districts in terms of daily new cases and 7-day moving average. And in each cities, if you look at the, besides the name, total confirmed cases are given in the parentheses, in the brackets. Pune, Delhi, Bangalore, Mumbai, Thane on the top. These are districts. And if you look at the trend, there is no consistency in the trend. Some cities, some districts are showing dual upsurge. Some district like Bangalore is showing the first rise continuing. Mumbai is showing continuous rise. There is no downfall ever. Thane is showing double rise. Chennai is still maintaining the high trend. East Godavari is now going down. Nagpur is now going down. Nasik is now coming down. West Godavari is slightly coming down. Chittoor is now maintaining high trend. Kolkata is worrisome and is going to get worse in October and November because of Durga Puja festival. If you look at Kolkata, third line, second, it is maintaining high trend. Anantapur is going down, Guntur is going down, maintaining, Kurnool is going down, North 24 Parganas in West Bengal is going up. So Calcutta and North 24 Parganas are contiguous districts. They are showing upward trend, both. Lucknow is maintaining at a high level. It is not going down. Trend is reverse. Nellore is showing downward trend. Raigad is showing downward trend. Prakasham, Andhra Pradesh is showing downward trend. Visakhapatnam is showing downward trend. Jalgaon in Maharashtra is showing downward trend. Ahmednagar in Maharashtra is showing upward trend, maintaining at a plateau. Kadapa in Andhra Pradesh is showing downward trend, and Kolhapur is showing downward trend. So there is quite wide diversity in each districts. And mind you, these are only top 25 districts. And there are 700 districts in our country. Next, please. This is showing states case fatality ratio as percentage. On the top is Punjab, which is showing the highest case fatality rate, even higher than the global case fatality rate of 2.92. It is showing more than 3% case fatality. Maharashtra, Gujarat, West Bengal, Delhi, Pondicherry, Madhya Pradesh, Sikkim, Jammu Kashmir and Tamil Nadu are showing higher than Indian case fatality rate, which is 1.53%. All red colored dots are states with higher than Indian average. All blue colored dots are lower than Indian average. Next, please. These are the two graphs where you find the purple line, horizontal line is 5% test positivity rate, and the graph which is colored from blue to green to yellow, it shows the cases per tested as percentage. So overall, now we have reached the positivity rate of 7.7% yesterday. And if you look at the test per million, that is a red graph, red line, which is gone up to 61,000 tests per million, which is very good. But we need to maintain this trend. Next, please. This is daily test moving average. So if you look at the entire 20 states, you would not find there is a consistency in terms of daily test number of tests increasing. In fact, if you look at Andhra Pradesh, if you look at Maharashtra, if you look at West Bengal, and if you look at Telangana, if you look at Gujarat, if you look at Rajasthan, and if you look at Bihar, the number of tests done has increased instead of increasing. In the last week, they have decreased. So that's an area which requires attention. Next, please. If you had noticed last week also, I told you, since the festival season is coming, the government of India has started, the Prime Minister announced a Jan Andolan, sorry, a COVID-19 appropriate behavior on 8th of this month. And this campaign, this Andolan, shall continue up to December, which requires everybody in the country to adopt COVID appropriate behavior. That is, wear your mask properly, wash your hand regularly, and maintain social distancing. Every citizen of India, unless practiced universally, shall result in increased infection during the month of October end, November and December, because of two reasons: festival and winter together. And you must remember, in North India during this time there is also excess fog, excess PM 2.5, which makes it, the whole air deteriorate in some of its quality. So environmental deterioration, festivals and winter, three together are going to be the challenges in the next 3 months. And that is why Government of India along with the state governments and district administration and municipal corporation across the country, need to take this Jan Andolan very aggressively. So I would request all members, whosoever is working, whichever organization, they must motivate their management to ensure that all the employees and all the contractual employees and everybody around in the community is motivated to take this pledge and practice the pledge, because only then we will be able to prevent or reduce the impact of these three factors as environmental pollution, the festival season, and winter. Otherwise, we're going to face a very challenging situation in the next 3 months. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Dr. Rajiv Sen, sir. So, Dr. Krishna Kumar, you have seen that
Yes, sir.
yeah, this is a very grave situation before every one of us, because you know, as a medical professional, and especially you are a anesthesiologist and a critical care doctor, so you know better than every one of us that despite so many precautions we are taking, the number of the cases is increasing, and this particular virus, it has got such a pathology and pathogenesis that with the evolving situation, we are also learning now how to manage the patients who are getting infected, what to do with them when they are asymptomatic, what to do with them when they are symptomatic, and when what should be the line of treatment when they get some pulmonary involvement and they have some breathlessness, and even the post recovery period, that is also very crucial, as I told you. So everyone, good evening once again, and after this overall view of this COVID EPID update by Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain sir, our today's guest speaker is Dr. Krishan Kant, and Dr. Krishan Kant, actually he is an anesthesiologist, and he is his topic is dearth of therapeutic options in critically ill COVID patients, and what are the expectations from CytoSorb. So Dr. Dr. Krishan Khan, in addition to
Yes.
CytoSorb, we would also like to know what are the treatments which are available for critically ill patients in your ICU care, and you can elaborate upon the treatment options which are available for these COVID patients. To everyone, may I
Okay.
introduce Dr. Krishan Kumar. Dr. Krishan Kumar is a classified specialist and anesthesiologist and critical care specialist, and he has done his MBBS in February 2003 from Kasturba Medical College, Mangalore, Manipal University. He did his PG post-graduation in medical legal systems from Symbiosis Institute of Health Sciences in 2006. He did his MD in anesthesiology from Army Hospital and Research and Referral, Delhi University, New Delhi. And he did his DNB also in anesthesiology, and postdoctoral fellowship he did in 1618 in critical care. Dr. Krishna is also active member of European Society for Intensive Care Medicine and Indian Society of Anesthesiologists into critical care medicine. So lot of credentials to your favor, Dr. Krishan Kumar, and we are lucky enough to have you today, and we would like to understand in detail about this COVID treatment, and especially we as industrial physicians, we as medical professionals in different industries, what all precautions we have to take at different stages, and what all things we should know, that these all treatment facilities are available, these protocols you have to follow for the management of your patient, because in every organization, like I am from Indian Health Corporation, we also have a lot of patients, and at different stages they are, like they are in home isolation or they are in hospital, although they are mild symptomatics, or they are in ICU care, or they are on ventilators. So management also asks from us, what is his condition, or what are the other treatment available. So like for example, I'll give you one example that uh, there are phases of this viral pathogenesis, like the acute viral phase, and then this pulmonary phase, and then the recovery phase. So in people normally during the active replication of the virus, the remdesivir and other drugs which are antiviral, they are effective. But what we have seen that even in ICU patients who are already there for 12-13 days and the treatment is going on and they are in pulmonary phase, and pulmonary phase is not because of the active virus, it is all because of the damage which is caused by the virus and the debris which is there because of this active this dead virus. So in that case remdesivir and other antiviral drugs, and especially the steroids, when to give the steroid, when to start the steroid. So we would like to understand it from you, Dr. Krishnan Kumar, and you can share your screen and start the presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Krishnan Kumar, your presentation will be live on the YouTube also. Although we'll be having it on the on our cloud storage, but
can you see my slides, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee for giving me an opportunity to talk on this about this coronavirus. And first of all, I would like to say I'm not an expert in this. Every day we are learning new things happening. Every day the new evolvements are happening. And what we learned last 2 months back is now outdated, and we're finding new articles coming up every day. So I'll be talking about the therapeutic options available in the critically ill COVID patients. There are a lot of treatment options which have come, and they have been initially been shown as a game changers, but now they have been deleted from the treatment. Now every day is a new therapy is coming up, and is causing new changes in the treatment policies. First of all, I would like to see this the rising trend. Actually, Dr. Jain sir has already covered on this very nicely on the rising trends of cases every day globally as well as in India. This is like similar. This virus is akin to similar to those of this is like of a SARS-CoV which was seen in 2002 and 3, and the MERS-CoV as a Middle East respiratory coronavirus which was seen in 2012. And number of the cases which are coming up every day, as this has been nicely presented by Dr. Jain, so I will not be wasting time on this cases on epidemiology of cases in India and various states. There is a novel coronavirus which has come in 2019 from the Wuhan in China. This is it has after the infection, the most commonest route of infection is either to the respiratory tract or to the GI system. To the gastrointestinal. These are patients also present with diarrhea as also a kind of a presenting symptom in these patients. The most commonest is the respiratory is having coughing, sneezing, mild running nose, shortness of breath, breathing difficulties, and sore throat. In severe cases, what we see is that they have kind of a pneumonia, which is having like a ground glass opacity, which are seen on the CT scan. Or they can go into florid ARDS with having air space consolidations with decrease in oxygenation saturation and things. They also have lung inflammation, and there's apart from the viral infection, this thing they also have inflammation of the lungs, which causes further worsening of your oxygen status, and they require subsequently requiring invasive mechanical ventilation. The kidneys again, because the patients are get severely dehydrated. They can present with acute kidney injuries. In digestive system, they can have diarrheas with dehydration and this leaky capillary syndrome. They can have hypotension and requiring IV fluids and vasopressor support, etc. Fever is also a common sign. Fever and fatigue is also a common sign. So as has been already mentioned, there are 3 stages of COVID-19 infection. The stage 1 is an early infection, which is seen in the first 7 days as a viral. There's increase in viral replication, which is seen there. The presentation is fever, which is there of more than 99.6 degrees Fahrenheit. They generally have the dry cough. They have severe body aches, headaches, and diarrhea. And the clinical signs, if you do investigations in these patients, you find there is a lymphopenia. What do you normally see is lymphocytosis in kind of viral infection. In this coronavirus, you find lymphopenia. And there's something called increased NLR ratio, that is the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio. So it's an increase also in prothrombin time, it's an increase in D-dimers, ferritin, LDH, FDP. Those are the most common things you see in clinical initial features. And the second stage is the pulmonary phase, which is the second week of the infection. This is the time when they have hypoxia. The PaO2 by FiO2 ratio starts decreasing. Normally it's around more than 300, start becoming less than 300. They have shortness of breath. If you do the X-rays, you find very classically, very typical of this viral infection is they have peripheral ground glass opacities. You find all the airspace consolidations from the peripheries on the X-ray. If you do an CT scan in these patients, again you find like very typically which is seen is the ground glass GGOs which are seen, and also the consolidations which can occur in the later phase. But remember, there is no pleural effusion at any time. What we notice most of the time is very few percentage of cases which you have seen has got pleural effusion. That itself is another good sign to say that these patients have got COVID-19 severe pneumonia infection. And the stage 3, which is seen in the third week of the thing, is hyperinflammatory response phase, where they have this severe ARDS, SIRS, shock, and multi-organ failure. They can have increased elevation of interleukin-6 levels, the inflammatory markers like D-dimers, ferritins, CRP, LDH, troponins, and NT-proBNP levels. You see the pathophysiology of what happens in this third phase of hyperinflammatory response. There's what is called a cytokine storm syndrome. There is because of the virus enters to the ACE receptors which are present in the respiratory tract and in the GI tract, and they enter after entering the cells, they replicate. The antigen is presented to these antigen presenting cells, because the macrophages and the epithelial cells, they release some cytokines, and they present to the antigen presenting cells, they release the cytokines. And the antigen presenting also stimulate the cellular as well as humoral immunity. The T cells, which release all the cytokines, inflammatory markers, and the B cells, when they get stimulated from the Th helper T cells, they release all these immunoglobulins, which are help in maybe in later parts of this, can help as a kind of immunity to the patient. The pathophysiology, if you see this, the viral envelope, they're called spike proteins, basically. Spike glycoprotein, they bind to the cellular receptors called ACE2, that is angiotensin converting enzyme 2. The viral genome is released into the cytoplasm of the cell and is translated into 2 polyproteins and structural proteins. The viral antigen again is presented to the antigen presenting cells and is recognized by the cytotoxic virus specific cytotoxic T lymphocytes. And there's a stimulation of the body's both humoral as well as cellular immunity, which are mediated by the virus-specific B cells and the T cells. And there's a significant release of large volume amounts of pro-inflammatory cytokines, especially the interferon alpha, the interferon gamma, and IL-1 beta, interleukin 6, and interleukin 12, TNF alpha, and tumor growth factor beta. So all this causes a cytokine storm, which trigger a violent attack by the immune system. They cause the inflammatory response to the virus itself. They cause causes a severe multi-organ failure. Like in lungs, it can cause ARDS. In liver, it can cause hepatitis and liver failure. You can have AKI, you can have encephalopathy, and finally death in severe cases of SARS-CoV-2 infection. And next time, destroying the immune evasion of SARS-CoV-2 is only the imperative in its treatment. How to avoid this, decrease the immune response to this kind of to the virus is the only way forward to reduce this infection, to prevent the organ damage. So if you see this slide, this following a SARS-CoV infection, in some patients, what we have also noticed is there are why few people don't develop severe infections and why some people develop severe infection is again that's all based on their immune response to the response to the virus. Some of them don't respond to severe infection; they have very asymptomatic and mild symptoms. Some who respond, they have very severe cytokine, severe inflammatory response to the virus. They have multi-organ failure and ARDS and those kind of other organ failure. So some of them just get away with mild symptoms and they recover well. They also develop immune body recognized by the T cells and B cells. There is a neutralizing antibodies are developed by them. In some of them, they don't develop and they succumb to this virus. Okay. So the extrapulmonary manifestation, what we see in this COVID-19 infection is the most common is what we found is the cardiac effect. Basically, they develop what we have noticed the patients having acute myocardial ischemia presenting as acute MI patients who they have myocarditis, they can have cardiogenic shock, acute cor pulmonalis, Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, stress cardiomyopathy is seen. And in endocrine, we've seen most common is hyperglycemia. Even in patients who are asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic patients, we found that the sugar levels are quite high, even though they are not diabetics. In patients with diabetic, definitely they find a very, very high sugar levels are there. You can also present with diabetic ketoacidosis. In GI system, you have diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and anorexia. Neurological signs is like they have encephalopathy. We also have seen patients who had present with acute Guillain-Barré syndrome post-COVID viral infection. They can have anosmia. Strokes also very commonly seen. We have seen plenty of such cases where patients present had COVID infection and then have strokes, ischemic strokes and hemorrhagic strokes. Thromboembolism, you have DVT. This is a prothrombotic state, both as well as dehydration, and the virus also causes this. The viral infection itself is a prothrombotic state causing deep vein thrombosis, acute pulmonary thromboembolism, and catheter-related thrombosis. We also seen when we have put the patients on extracorporeal membrane oxygen therapy, we found that lots of this catheters getting blocked, the oxygenator in the ECMO getting blocked. And hepatic, we find elevated transaminitis is seen. And this again becomes an issue when we are treating with these patients with remdesivir. Remdesivir, as per the manufacturing recommendations, remdesivir should not be given in patients who got severe transaminitis. In renal, we have acute kidney injury, we have proteinuria and hematuria. They also have very important is the dermatological changes, which is very commonly missed actually, I would say. They have skin rash, erythematous rash, livedo reticularis, petechiae, and vesicles and urticaria. So it is important, they say just present with some skin rash. I think if somebody has got respiratory symptoms, then we should now in current scenario, COVID-19 infection has to be suspected. The clinical process, if you see the time of onset of dyspnea is generally seen after 5 days actually. So 7 days to hospital admission and 8 days to develop ARDS. Very, very classical. If it is only the second week, that's why it is very important to carefully monitor. The patients should monitor, either they self-monitor their oxygen saturation at home if they're initially asymptomatic, or because they're supposed to quarantine, self-quarantine them for 14 days. And after 10 days, after 5th day, you're supposed to recheck. Somebody is asymptomatic, you have to check a viral examination, do after 6th or 7th day to do RT-PCR to check whether these patients are positive or not. But it is the 8th day. From the second week onwards, you have to be more careful, because this is the time when the patients can worsen actually. They can develop this severe breathlessness and the fall in saturation, and might develop acute respiratory distress syndrome. What are the predictors of mortality? Which causes, what we have seen, any patients who got severe respiratory failure is along with associated with cardiac involvement. As what we saw is the most commonest cause of death. Then is some of them have even have also strokes also is commonly seen, and 5 to 6% of patients we actually don't know why they have actually died. Probably there's an underlying pulmonary thromboembolism actually. The risk factors is the factors and biomarkers. Although it is mentioned in the slide is age of more than 65 years, it is not to be taken in a negative way that anybody more than 65 will die. It is not like that. The most of the treatment policy in management of COVID-19 infection is good care, good critical care in the ICU, good nursing care. They are the ones who actually save them. Actually, I feel more than the drugs or anything else, it is general good critical care principles. If we follow properly, the patients can survive actually. And we have seen even patients with 75, 85 years also, where we went ahead and put on ventilator, where they got a tracheostomy, and they got successfully weaned off, and they've been decannulated and discharged home. And another thing which is commonly seen in the male population, there's a male preponderance of this viral infection. For some reason, I don't know why these males are more commonly affected than females. It is not that females don't get affected, but males have got more preponderance. Other thing which you see in the laboratory findings of the viral infection is the WBC counts, what is called as and the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio. I think more than 3, we should be worried that it means there's a lymphopenia. It's a very commonest finding on the CBC. There's a complete blood count you do. The platelet count, we can have thrombocytopenia. Hemoglobin can be low. The CRP, the procalcitonin can be elevated. The AST, ALT is also there's increased transaminitis, increased serum creatinine, LDH and D-dimer, FDP, all these things are, and ferritin, all these things are elevated. Alpha hydroxybutyrate dehydrogenase is rarely done. I've never used this test, but it is mentioned in the books. So what is the risk of patients who are hospitalized with COVID-19 infection? What we found that earlier it was mentioned that patients should get intubated early because if you use HFNC or NIV, there's a risk of aerosolization of this all the viruses, and the chances of the healthcare workers who are working in ICU can get infected. So, but the later on it becomes, it has shown that people who are all got intubated and mechanically ventilated, the mortality was very high in these patients. Nowadays, the current policy is initially you start with HFNC with non-rebreathing mask, sorry, with the face mask. Then you go for non-rebreathing mask. Then you go to HFNC or NIV, and then, but subsequently, if they fail NIV or HFNC, then you have to intubate these patients. And of course, we have to always try awake proning. What we generally practice in our ICUs is we tell the patients to lie prone along with either if it is on HFNC or if it's on NIV, we ask them to lie prone, and we found there's a significant improvement in saturation and avoiding of intubation mechanical ventilation. So the therapeutic, what are the treatment options available for us? There are several things have come, as I said in the beginning itself. A lot of treatments have come and went. There's something. Everybody said this is the game changer now. It's going to change the entire way how we're going to manage the COVID-19 infection. Like in the chloroquine has come, hydroxychloroquine, the lopinavir and ritonavir combination. Initially, it has come in a big way, but then all the clinical trials have failed to show any reasonable benefit of treatment of COVID-19. Then came the remdesivir. Yes, we use remdesivir in patients who have severely hypoxic, especially in the second week. When most of the patients do present only in the second week when they start having breathlessness and they start desaturating, having severe cough. They're not able to walk. They're not able to do their daily activities. So this is the time when they come. Initially, we do give remdesivir as a loading dose of 200 mg on the day 1 and followed by 100 mg OD for next 4 days. So it is an antiviral. If it is given early in the right time, has got some definite benefit is there. Then azithromycin has got its own immunomodulatory properties with that. Then came the tocilizumab, the anti-IL-6, which is an immunomodulating drug. Initially, it is used for the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis, but later they found that here in these patients, they have hyperinflammatory response to the viral infection. Tocilizumab is again, if you use it in the right time, and always be sure that the patient's procalcitonin level, they don't have any other secondary bacterial infection, then we can give tocilizumab, which we found there's some role if you give it in the right time actually. If you get delayed, then there's a chance that there's not much of beneficial actually. What we give is around 66 mg per kg body weight as initial loading dose. We give only 2 doses, the day 1 and day 2. And then thereafter we don't, we definitely do IL-6 levels also simultaneously to see how severe is IL-6. We have seen patients having up to 4,000 and 4,500 to high interleukin 6 levels. So this is a time these patients are actually they have severe ARDS and multi-organ failure. Other thing which came is convalescent plasma. Again, convalescent plasma is basically we are looking for the antiviral antibodies. So if it is again, it is to be used if it has to be used early. Otherwise, there's no use giving in a patient who was giving late. There's no beneficial actually. But the problem with convalescent plasma is the availability of donors. It is very difficult to get the donors in the right time, the correct blood group to be given. This is the main crux of the problem because of lack of adequate plasma donors actually. Then the hallmarks of COVID-19 infections is the hallmarks of COVID-19 is it infects the lower respiratory tract, causing direct pulmonary injury to the viral application. The virus then also get detected in the bloodstream, may cause direct cardiac injury, the liver injury, and other organs like liver, kidney, and hematological system. Also seen is influenza and other coronavirus is the development of the cytokine storm syndrome, resulting in a capillary leak syndrome, organ injury and complications. The cytokine storm syndrome is nothing new. The terminology is nothing new for COVID-19. It has also been initially mentioned in sepsis, severe sepsis, in patients who got pancreatitis, burns, which is very commonly seen. The cytokine sepsis again is very common. The cytokine storm syndrome is very commonly seen routinely in our practice. They are the ones result finally cause leaky capillaries. They cause the multi-organ failure, other complications. So this contributes to higher risk of death due to high incidence of, like, as I mentioned, the ARDS is 61% cause of deaths, basically shock and renal injuries and acute cardiac injuries. MI is very common. I mean, very commonly seen. Presenting an MI right in front of you, patients will have ST elevations because of COVID-19, especially the elderly population. arrhythmias, and organ dysfunction. So what happens is following infection is one thing, then followed by cytokine storm, there's a vasoplegic shock, and causes multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. There is an article published in Lancet has shown that the cytokine storm can be associated with the increased disease severity and multi-organ failure. So we have to do something for this cytokine storm basically. So what are the treatment options available for considering the cytokine storm? So they recommend that you give anti-prevent the hyperinflammation by using these drugs like IL-6, IL-1, IL-6 and antagonists like tocilizumab. And this cytokine profile, what we see is similar to the secondary HLH, that hemophagocytosis, lymphohistiocytosis, which is seen in various conditions from connected diseases to many secondary infections. All these things can cause secondary HLH. The liver dysfunction is also very common. As I already mentioned, there's high rates of liver dysfunction in patients with COVID-19 infection. So how does this cytosorb helps? Personally, I generally reserve cytosorb treatment in patients who have severe ARDS, severe multi-organ failure, who needs either invasive mechanical ventilation, or patients who require extracorporeal membrane oxygen therapy. I have used it in patients patients who got severe COVID ARDS. On ECMO also we had run the cytosorb therapy, and even in patients with sepsis, even non-COVID patients also we had run cytosorb with good outcomes actually. So basically, it is a highly compatible and porous polymer with condensed polymer beads. It removes the hydrophobic substance due to the physical properties in the foci, and basically it absorbs. It is not by dialysis or a filtration of it. It simply absorbs all the adsorption of this high volume content of this inflammatory markers basically. So it's high concentration. It is high removal efficiency is there, but it is basically a concentration dependent absorption. The lower concentration, there may be no absorption at all. So no point in running a cytosorb therapy. Okay, so how does it differ from a dialysis system? So dialysis basically works on a counter current mechanism, which uses a dialysate which is running in the opposite direction. The blood is flowing in the opposite direction of the dialysate, and it is a diffusion of solutes and ultrafilters of fluid across the systemic membrane. But here there is no use of any dialysate in this thing. You just have to connect to the dialysis machine. There is no requirement of any dialysate. You just connect to the blood, comes from one side and then leaves to the patient, goes to the patient. It basically absorbs all the increased hyperinflammatory markers. So what is the problem with this? The cytokine storm, this is called vasoplegic shock and multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. Patients can have a capillary leak syndrome. They can have a refractory hypotension, which is requiring high noradrenaline support or vasopressin support. They have leaky capillaries, microcirculation disorders, high lactate levels, and there's increased PCO2 gap is increased with septic cardiomyopathy. So cytosorb definitely has got a role in protection of the capillary integrity, improvement of cardiac function, improvement of microcirculation, and reduction of vasopressin needs. There's one thing which we have strongly noticed is when you use this cytosorb filters, there is definitely decrease in your vasopressin requirement, especially your noradrenaline and vasopressin levels. They significantly gotten. I think that's a very good sign. You get it's very good sign, because at least you could take them off one organ support. At least you are in a better position because you are able to handle other organs at least. So that's a very good important point. This reduction of vasopressin needs. It is. And that helps in regaining the control in the critically ill patients. The features, they have this polymer bead based technology. They got high surface area, almost 45,000 square meters. That's equivalent to more than 4 football grounds square area. The size is selected between 10 to 55 kilodaltons. The cytosorb removes broad spectrum of cytokines through size selectivity approach. And it is compatible with any of the dialysis machine. You can use with hemodialysis, you can use with SLED, you can use the CRRT machine, and it is very easy to set it up on these machines. So in hemodialysis machine, if you are running it, at least you should run it for at least 8 hours. We had run it for up to 12 hours also. And a SLED machine is up to 12 hours, and CRRT can continue it for 12 to 24 hours. And there's a benefit is seen with this. The important features are there's a high body absorption surface. and selective adsorption of hydrophobic substances up to 55 kilodaltons. It is mainly based on concentration dependent removal. Is higher the concentration of this inflammatory markers, higher is the chance of getting it removed. Lower is the concentration, it's hardly any benefit to us. So elimination of elevated levels, basically we need to check the IL-6 levels. It's better to check the IL-6 levels if you are starting this adjunct therapy in the treatment of COVID-19 patients. But then it's expensive test, but then if you want to run that, it's better to have an IL-6 level, because if IL-6 levels are low, I don't think we should run the cytosorb therapy. If it is high, then there's definitely the more benefits. It also absorbs this damage-associated molecular proteins and the pathogen-associated molecular proteins, and the PAMs and the DAMs, bad bacterial toxins, myoglobins, bilirubin, etc. So it is a potential role beneficial in this patient who got cytokine storm syndrome, basically cytokine release syndrome also. So it helps in overcoming your vasopressoric shock and prevents multi-organ dysfunction. So there's a study done in cytosorb therapy by John Levinson. He mentioned the use of absorbent cartridges designed to remove cytokines and other circulating media should be considered in such kind of a scenario. Okay. So, and even in the HLH guidelines, the hemophagocytic lymphocyte guidelines, they also mentioned the role of hemoabsorption therapy for managing of HLH. Remember, it is still, and actually it's a good critical care. Is in a critical care unit is most important than any kind of adjunctive therapies. The rest is all we are seeing. There are something which comes says something yesterday, but something comes out then next day it is after 2-3 months you find that there is the trials are showing against in the same journal again they're showing there no use. So, but it still has got a role, I feel, as an adjunctive therapy, especially in giving an organ support in patients who are on mechanically ventilated patients, patients who have cardiovascular instability, patients who require renal replacement therapy, and they are the ones who then definitely can benefit from this. And important to remember is the source control. Your antibiotic therapy is, of course, very important. Wherever there's something can be drained, the pus or something should be drained, either by surgical or by intervention radiologically. And good resuscitation is very important, by the oxygen, the fluids, and your renal replacement supports and other things is very important. Where do you connect this in cytosorb therapy? If you're using on a filter, if you're using on a normal filter, you can just connect it. You can just use as a solo connected in the dialysis machine, or you can use an RRT as a pre-filter. Just before the filter, you connect it, and then after the blood goes to the dialysis filter, and then the patient gets back to the blood. If you're using in an ECMO, which we had some experience with in using it, it is to be connected. It is to be connected after the membrane, because the pressure is positive, so that after the pump, and then again the blood is back to the pre-pump disconnected. So that way there is no damage to the oxygenator which is there on the extracorporeal membrane oxygenator. And remember, the blood flow of the cytosorb is very high compared to dialysis, which is up to between 150 to 250 ml per minute. Here the blood flow of cytosorb is up to 100 to 700 ml per minute can be run actually. In RRT, we can also renal replacement as a post-filter as well as pre-filter can be used. Hemodynamic stabilization with cytosorb, there are plenty of articles which quote the use of cytosorb therapy in improving the shock reversal. As I mentioned, we found very significant. We were able to taper off the NORAD completely following the cytosorb therapy, and hemodynamic stabilization is achieved very well, and there's an improved in your sepsis scores like Apache 2 and SOFA scores, as well as the lab parameters, and the blood lactate levels get controlled. The TLC levels and things go, your total leukocyte count goes better. This is also improved in the respiratory functions by measure the PaO2 by FiO2, the ventilator parameters, the lung mechanics, which are the indirect measurements of the capillary leak syndrome. So even in ECMO, we have found there's improvement in oxygenation with it. Overall, I would say it is, especially in patients with hemodynamic instability and patients who got acute respiratory distress syndrome, the cytosorb therapy works pretty well in COVID-19. In patients who are planned to receive tocilizumab but haven't been given at the time of CVH start, cytosorb therapy should be continued for 24 to 40 days after being a tocilizumab treatment. So along with cytosol, and then after giving cytosol, you can give tocilizumab for 24 to 48 hours. So the clinical criteria of starting a cytosol therapy is basically somebody who's got severe vasoplegia with elevated lactate levels and high need of vasopressor therapy, norepinephrine of more than 0.3 micrograms per kg per minute. That does not respond to standard therapy by even giving steroids or something. Therapy should begin as early as begin within first 6 hours and a maximum 24 hours to start of standard therapy. And second indication is in patients who have severe respiratory distress syndrome requiring high ventilatory support, or patients who are requiring extracorporeal support therapy. So these are three main indications for giving cytosol therapy: refractory vasoplegia, high ventilatory supports, and patients who are on ECMO or extracorporeal supports. The critical cases, if you use it in early, the prevention of there is improvement in oxygenation index, and also probably the lung compliance get better. So better to have if you are starting, and it is better to start early. So other possible users is based on not a documented experience, but not specifically to COVID-19. The cytosol therapy can be used in patients with severe sepsis, pancreatitis. It's also got some potential benefit. So how to change after the follow-up and change of absorber after the start of cytosol? The first absorber should be removed after 12 hours. After 24 hours, the absorber should be changed every 12 to 24 hours, depending on the clinical course, the degree of hemodynamic instability, and the pulmonary dysfunction. When to stop it should be re-evaluated. The therapy should be re-evaluated after every 2 to 3 days in case of primary respiratory problems. And in case of severe vasoplegia, as leading cytosol should be continued until the shock reversal and reduction of the vasopressor need is up to less than 10% of the baseline requirement. Okay. So this is a case report which like to show the 40-year-old man with uneventful history was admitted to ICU due to severe respiratory failure caused by SARS-CoV-2. The RT-PCR is positive. Mechanically ventilated with an FiO2 100%, PEEP of 10. The initial PO2 FiO2 was 80, but increased up to 245 with all the recruitment menus like prone positioning and other things. The CRP is elevated, but other biochemistry, the procalcitonin was in normal range. The heme adsorption was performed with the cytosol. Anticoagulation was, yes, we have to give anticoagulation when you are running cytosol. You have to give at least 1,000 units per hour in the adult population. The heparin should be titrated by using APTT, serial APTT of at least every 6 hours we are using APTT, a target APTT of 60 to 80 seconds. And 3 sessions of cytosol was performed, and it's an improvement in PaO2 by FiO2 by day 4. The CRP levels started decreasing. Your procal became normalized. IL-6 also started decreasing. So there's a definitely there is a decrease in the inflammatory markers and improvement in the respiratory variables. The X-ray findings also is very, very classical. In the first time, you see the bilateral multiple confluent opacities in chest X-ray, and following this therapy is improvement in the clearing of your ground glass opacities, and the oxidation gets much better after cytosol therapy and tocilizumab. So, to conclude that a combined use of cytosol less and tocilizumab was followed by rapid improvement in the gas X-ray and chest X-ray in the patient with SARS-CoV-2 pneumonia. These variations with a sharp decrease in the CRP levels and IL-6 levels remain low even in the day after the end of treatment. The combined approach of cytosol with tocilizumab patients with SARS-CoV-induced pneumonia, ARDS, and multi-organ dysfunction with elevated levels of CRP. But remember, do not use tocilizumab if somebody has got high procalcitonin level. That can cause secondary infections. The treatment of patients with severe COVID-19 requiring support with VV ECMO is particularly challenging, and because we had placed 2 patients on ECMO recently with COVID-19 severe pneumonia. One of them was just 2 days back only. I have decannulated him and he was doing well. So interleukin 6 is a good predictor of negative outcomes. Based on experience in septic patients, even an absorber can be changed every 24 hours. Some patients requiring cytokine absorption using cytosol shortly after initiation of ECMO up to 72 hours can be given. So with use of even VV ECMO, you find that without cytokine absorption, your IL-6 was very high. With this thing, I totally agree with this. Even we did serial IL-6 levels in patients on ECMO before and after the cytosol therapy, and we found a significant drop in interleukin 6 levels and there's a decrease in the hyperinflammatory response. There are some recent approvals in COVID-19 by the FDA. Also in 10th April 2020, they use recommended for patients to treat more than over 18 years with confirmed or imminent respiratory failure due to COVID-19. On 6 May 2020, the DCGI has also approved for the condition elevated of cytokines in patients from over 18 years of age with COVID-19. To conclude, my take-home message is a cytokine storm will trigger the immune system and cause ARDS, multi-organ failure, and finally death in severe cases of SARS-CoV-2 infection. And finally, a sepsis-like syndrome might occur frequently due to the virus itself or a superimposed bacterial infection. Accumulating evidence has a cytokine profile resembling a secondary HLH is associated with the COVID-19 disease severity. And cytokine absorption columns may aid in rescuing critically ill patients from a deleterious cytokine storm. And it is absorbed European FDA and European Union, even the Indian Drug Council, Directorate General of Control of Drugs also have approved for the extracorporeal therapy for the cytokine absorber in patients who got severe cytokine storm syndrome. Cytosol therapy may be promising and important therapeutic options in managing cytokine storm in severely critical ill patients, and a lot of results have been shown in the Italy Brescia in task force. Thank you for the attention. Hello.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna Kumar, for your and this enlightening presentation, starting from the infection till the last ARDS, how to manage the acute respiratory distress syndrome also, and even in case of severe cytokine storm, what are the treatment options available with us, and how this cytosol can help us to manage the cytokine storm. But our intention is always to not to reach up to that stage, and take the patient in an early stage with the right treatment at the right time. And there are some few questions from our panelists, and one question is from Dr. Sanjay Rotitor, that even after 2 injections of tocilizumab, if IL-6 levels are very high, then will you continue to increase the number of injections?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay.
Sorry. I would not suggest recommend, because more number of IL-6 tocilizumab can cause significant immune suppression, and patient can get secondary bacterial, especially the multi-drug resistance which are there in ICU. So I wouldn't suggest to give more than 2 doses of tocilizumab.
So, what is the incidence and frequency of using this cytosorb in your ICU patients?
So far, sir, we have used on 4 patients so far. One of them was on very bad severe ARDS. We had to put him on ECMO. We had run almost 4 cycles of cytosorb therapy on him. Though the IL-6 levels are come down, showing improvement, but he had a complication with the heparin, basically the anticoagulation, and he had an intracellular bleed. So we had basically had issue with the anticoagulation part, and we had problem is had a stroke because of anticoagulation. Otherwise, the IL-6 levels have come down. You are able to, the oxygenation requirement is gone down. We're able to take him off from that, but unfortunately, he had succumbed to with a stroke. Basically, he had a large, massive intracellular bleed. That was the main concern. That's something with the anticoagulation, basically.
Okay. Now, may I request all the panelists, they can put on their videos, and Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain, sir, you can.
Yeah, Dr. Krishna Kumar, I must compliment you for comprehensively addressing the issue, which is challenging.
Thank you, sir.
At the moment, the situation is challenging and confusing as well. There are conflicting reports about each modality of treatment. So I would like to know about 2 additional modalities which have come into fashion because of President Trump being given. One is Regeneron, the antibodies. Second is melatonin, to improve anti-inflammatory properties. If President of USA was given, and that too in very early phase, he was not in I would not say in the severe phase at all, within mild to moderate stage, and he was given Regeneron immunity boosters as well as melatonin. So, what are your comments on these two?
So I've not, I have not used them, so I have no idea about it. So I would not like to comment on that. I have not
Yeah.
used them.
Even the literature, you won't find these two modalities. But in
Yes,
US,
even
this
it's
was
nowhere
given.
it's mentioned. It's nowhere it's
Yes.
mentioned. It is
And
nowhere
mind you,
mentioned.
he was admitted in a defense medical facility in US.
Exactly. I would like to not to comment on that.
Right.
Dr. Krishan Kumar, can I ask you one question that like when the replication phase is over and we are like the symptomatic phase is over after like 5 days of asymptomatic and 8 days of the symptomatic phase, then if the hypoxia and this hypoxemia develops, then what should be the exact timing when we should start steroid even in home isolation cases?
Yeah. Home isolation. I have with home isolation. Because I'm not treating patients at home. So in hospital patients who are severely hypoxic, especially saturation is going less than 90%, we are starting dexamethasone. Initially, we were giving dexamethasone 6 mg OD that is based on the recovery trial. But recently, it's just come Codex trial. Basically, they use higher dose of dexamethasone, the 20 mg OD for 5 days, and then 10 mg OD for next 5 days, or till the time of taken off from till the time they're taken off from the discharge from the ICU or from mechanical ventilation. So we have been now, initially we were giving 6 mg OD, now we have changed to 20 mg OD for this patient who was severely hypoxic. And we had a good results actually with the high dose steroid, dexamethasone.
What will be your choice if you are given choice of this methylprednisolone and dexamethasone? Because people studies, they indicate something different.
So the random what is it called, the trials which have been done, which has shown initially they've been done on both methylprednisolone and on both on dexamethasone. But if you see so if you combine all the trials in this, most of them use dexamethasone as I find dexamethasone is superior over methylprednisolone.
Okay, and these patients in ICU and the hospitalized patient.
Yes.
Like what we have seen that when they are admitted, that viral replication phase is over, and then they are in the
Yes.
immune dysregulation phase when they are admitted in the dyspnea or they are having hypoxia. Though at that time, is it right to give remdesivir or antiviral treatment?
No, sir. I would reserve it only if the patients come quite early, like within maybe the first 2-3 days after. Even sometimes some patients have developed very early, even it not be on the 7th, 5th day or 6th day, but within 3rd day, 4th day, they have become very breathlessness for following this infection. So that is the time actually. If you give it in early, not in the maybe a 10th day or something, I would not give it. I would reserve it for some patients who are more benefiting or more deserving.
So what we are seeing in many hospitalized patients, when they are in ICU, they are loaded with this remdesivir, and it has got no use.
No use.
That
I don't think so. If you give it late, there's no use. I don't think it of any benefit if you're giving it late. But if you give it in the first 3-4 days of having the hypoxia, patients coming early too. If you give it early, then it's even in the convalescent plasma also the same problem. If you give it early, there's a good chance of there's a benefit to the patient. But if you give it late, again there's of no use, because the second phase we are only dealing with inflammation, not the virus at all.
Yeah.
Basically, the first week is only the part where the virus replication is there. So if you give it only in this time, that is of any benefit. But the second week, it is only the hyperinflammatory response. So that is the time when this antivirus or even the convalescent plasma is of not of much use. That is what we are hospital policy is not to give anybody in second week of coming late, because there is no virus replication at all in that second week. It is only the inflammation which are dealing with at the time.
Dr. Krishna, you told about intubation. How early you are doing intubation, or are you doing intubation? What is the critical stage at which you do intubation? Because right now, what people say that intubation should be avoided because, as you rightly said, it increases the fatalities only. And
Yes, sir.
what is your take on?
So we are not intubating the patients till the time when we find that the patient's carbon dioxide is going very high. When the CO2 starts rising, actually, when there's no more, they are not able to compensate for the hypoxia. When the CO2 starts rising, that is the time when we are taking as a that is the time when the threshold is for intubation. Otherwise, we are initially managed with HFNC for all of them, HFNC on prone positioning, or we put them on NIV and NIV on prone positioning. NIV, if HFNC fails, then next best option is to put them on NIV. But NIV, again, we can't give high pressure supports and high PEEP in them because we found that they cause a lot of positive pressure. We found patients have developed pneumomediastinum, patients have developed pneumothorax also with NIV. So the pressure supports can be very high also. So we keep generally at 8 or 10 is the maximum. We don't cross more than that of the pressure support, and in the PEEP we don't cross more than 8 or up to 10 is our upper limit. We don't cross that because we did CT scans follow up of this patient. They developed they kind of developed subcutaneous emphysemas, pneumomediastinum. It's very commonly seen. We have seen that, sir. So we reserve intubation only in patients who are getting severely hypoxic. The PO2 is going less than 40. They're getting cyanosis or the CO2 goes up very high. That is the time when we think the patients can't anymore can manage by themselves. Then we are placing the intubation. We are not doing early intubation at all.
Another question, Dr. Krishna Kumar, like in the early stages of this COVID pandemic, we were seeing there was a lot of demand about the ventilators and these high sophisticated gadgets for maintaining the perfusion. And now what we are seeing is ventilators are lying ideal, and people are so there is some change in the protocol. People are being treated on intranasal oxygen rather than putting on ventilator.
Exactly. Because of this, all the trials showed in both in USA and in Italy and Spain, they showed early intubations. They showed higher mortality basically, and even in our own setups, in people initially we also were, and at least March, April, initially intubating the patient for almost survivability has increased. Actually, we're able to save more patients. Out of 10, we're at least saving 7 to 8 now. Initially, we could hardly save even 1 or 2 patients out of 10 because they were all of them have been initially intubated and put on mechanical ventilation, and they didn't survive at all. So I think now the choice of treatment is now HFNC or next maybe NIV, and then we go for I would just say even more a non-rebreathing mask, HFNC, then we go NIV, and then finally mechanical ventilation.
So you mean to say whenever you get hypoxia, then you should be admitted and you should be under the supervision, and
yes, sir.
accordingly, as per the requirement, you may be given intranasal oxygen or
yes, sir.
through the mask, and only for immunodysregulation is very, very bad, then in that case you will require the sophisticated treatment protocol, and
yes, sir.
and
Absolutely,
especially little cold cytosol that will be indicated when there is dysplasia and people are on ECMO or
yes, sir.
Or like they are in severe respiratory distress. So,
yes,
so now in India we have got a lot of treatment options available, but we as medical professionals, we should be aware of what treatment option is right for which patient and at what time we have to give that. So Dr. Sudha Ramachandran is there. She's from Chennai, madam. She's from Apollo Hospital and our past president. She would like to ask some questions from you. Yeah, Dr. Sudha.
Good evening.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, madam.
Doctor, thank you for a very informative talk. Because as the disease is evolving, so is the treatment, I feel. I don't know whether I'm right or wrong. I'm not an infectious disease person. But I see a lot of changes. What you said about the ventilators being used much earlier before and not so much now.
Yes.
Do you expect this also to evolve, to change to a different perspective as days go on? Or is it entirely dependent on the comorbidities and the symptoms of the patients?
For the symptomatology, the blood gas ABGs and they are the ones who actually guide us in intubating. It is not just comorbidities per se. the patient symptomatology and the ABGs and the hemodynamics, that are the one who is going to guide us. That is the time when we decide to patient to be intubated or not. Otherwise, initial setups, I would still go for HFNC or a non-invasive mask, and we could salvage most of the patients with patients on HFNC and NIV.
And on the number
Without
of
even
patients
intubating,
that been put on ventilator, I'm not saying initially or now,
Yes.
number of patients on ventilator,
Yes.
what would be a reasonable percentage who have made it?
Now, when we actually started putting them late, and even after intubation, we are doing prone ventilation, like 18 hours to maybe up to 22 hours in a day. And we are giving up to 4 to 5 sessions actually when after intubating. We are not giving up on them at all. We are still trying hard on these patients. And after 7th day, 8th day, what we found is the lungs start opening up actually after prone ventilation, especially even in the mechanical ventilation, proning is the best option. There's a very good recruitment manual by itself. And at the 7th day, 8th day, we are taking a call. If the patient made supine and is not PO2 is now maintained at a static rate, then is a time when we think that they might take more long time, because this is a time when they go into a fibrotic, probably into exudative and fibrotic stage of the lungs basically. So that is the time when we are doing a tracheostomy to them, and we are slowly weaning off from tracheostomy, and they take another 10 days or so. It's a long haul. Once they come to the ICU, it is expect them to be there for at least 2 to 3 weeks. 3 weeks is the minimum time a patient would be in ICU if you have a severe COVID pneumonia. Yeah, yes.
One last question. Patient was told, somebody known to me was told that they have come late after the symptoms started.
Yes.
So does it have an effect on this using ventilator and tracheostomy if they come later, maybe a week later after the symptoms started?
No.
Because this
We never
happened
know, ma'am. Actually,
today,
it is,
so I wanted to
found
check.
it is a, first of all, it's a very perplexing disease. It is what we find that some patients who are very healthy with no comorbidities also succumbing to the disease. Some patients with comorbidities also we found they are coming out of ventilator. So actually we don't know whom we can, actually there's no specific marker to say, yes, this is the patient who is going to die. There's no point trying anything further on this. I think that is a very nihilistic approach. I believe we should have we should keep trying. That's why I feel a good standard of good critical care is very important in salvaging the patients, more than any of these gadgets that we have.
It's individuals who finally decide.
Yes, ma'am. It is the personal. Yes, ma'am. Personalized, I think. I guess.
Because somebody with comorbidities got better and came out, and somebody who was young enough and we still are learning. The disease is evolving, and so is our treatment. That's my thought. Take home point.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you so
Absolutely,
much,
I agree with you. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Doctor, thank you, ma'am. Dr. Krishna, there are a few questions in the Q&A box. Like, do you use a full face mask respirator?
No, sir. We are using only PPEs, complete PPE covered with face shield and this thing. We are not using a respirator mask. We don't have because we have to see the HDU, the ICU. We actually keep changing our PPEs because we have to stay in one place, so we use only PPEs for 6 to 8 hours in the same. So we don't use the respirator. I mean, to say the 3M respirators, I have not used it, sir.
This is the related question. Will you advise doctor to use FFMR?
It is, if it is there, it is. If it is there, I think it's a good option. But as we are using N95 mask, and over that there is also another mask which you put the surgical mask, and we use a face shield. I think that's more than enough. I think you don't need to go for extra also. N95 masks are sufficient for us.
Okay. Then the use of Flavipiravir.
No, it is just a, I think it's just a placebo, nothing much. I have not used it, sir. The Favipiravir, are you talking about Favipiravir, sir? I have not used it. We are not using Favipiravir. We found it is just like a chloroquine only, which has come and it is going to, I mean, it died its own death actually. Favipiravir, we are not using it, sir. We are not using it also.
And what is the use of ecosprin and statins? Basically, these two drugs, they are being commonly advised.
No, sir, we are not using them. We are using LMWH for all the patients. We are using low molecular weight heparin, 1 mg per kg. Severe avid pneumonia, we are using 1 mg per kg body weight as LMWH. We are using it. We are using steroids and we are using antibiotics to prevent secondary infection. And good care of HFNC on NIV as the patient is on. So that is about it.
Regarding methylprednisolone.
And remdesivir, as I said.
Yeah.
Methylprednisolone, yes, one particular group of doctors here also use methylprednisolone 40 mg BD, 1 mg per kg body weight. Some of them, but after the Codex trial, the meta-analysis, there's a study which has come, the meta-analysis of all these things, of all the steroids versus dexamethasone versus methylprednisolone. Dexa has fared better over methylprednisolone. So, and we also found in our practice that dexamethasone is showing good results. And only few patients I have used methylprednisolone, they are also doing okay, but Dexa is, I find it superior 1 day dose. So methylprednisolone you have to give twice a day. This is only, Dexa is only single OD dose actually.
Dr. Krishna, we are also joined by very senior colleagues from different parts of the India. They are all, most of them, they are our past presidents of the association. May I request Dr. Vivek Chand Rao, he is there. Can he, if he has any comment or questions, sir? Dr. Vivek Chand Rao, sir.
Thank you very much, Sandeep.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
For calling me to comment. These two are one of the best presentations I have heard during this COVID pandemic. Dr. Rajiv is very well known to update us on daily what's happening in India and what's happening abroad all over the world. And Krishna Kumar's presentation was excellent. I think initially we were, as you said, that we have been trying so many things every day in and out. And initially we tried so many things, famotidine, to start with, famotidine as an anti-inflammatory, statins and ecosprin, all these things, colchicine also we have tried. But now I think we're restricting our results to remdesivir as an antiviral. I think that's a great learning. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Krishna Kumar, for an excellent.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Vivek, sir. We are joined by Dr. Maruti. He is quite active in our group, and we would like him to give his some comments or some question if he has.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for this excellent presentation. Really, it was wonderful, and recent updates were really very happy for that. Sir, what about the cases you are seeing with reinfections or relapses in your setup? So one point of view, sir. Reinfections.
We are getting patients with reinfections. We have got even patients who recently now one of the patients we have with a multiple myeloma who has come with a secondary reinfection. Yes, he also got DRDS. We are now managing it only with remdesivir and Dexa, steroids and LMWH. But he's also doing well. But he didn't go into such severe as a primary infection. Somebody who got a primary first-time infections who had got very severe. He's not gone into. But we are getting cases. We are getting secondary infections now. Patients the second time who got now positive within the short span of within 2 to 3 months. So it is happening. Maybe I don't know. We are going to face what we are going to face in future. It's always looking scary actually to know that we're getting a second time we're getting infection. I also got infected when I was working in COVID ICU. I was also admitted for 10 to 14 days in hospital. Then again, I'm working back in COVID ICU only. So it is really scaring actually. If you have to really get a second infection and go on ventilator, God only can save us. I don't know. It's a very dangerous scenario.
One more small question, sir. How about the antibody titration? We are all getting it done for the monitoring ourselves. That how much?
Yes, sir. Antibody titer again. I got for example, I got my own antibody tested after 3 months of me got infected, and antibodies are absolutely zero. There's no antibodies at all. So again, these antibodies titers, I don't know how it goes. It is maybe useful if you're planning to do a plasma donation to somebody. If they're good antibodies, maybe the other person can benefit it. But the titers are actually fading off over a period of time. That's what we have seen actually.
Thank you so much, Krishna. Thank you so much, Sandeep, sir. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Pingle, sir, if you have any comment or question, sir? Dr. Shyam Pingle.
Excellent presentation. And there were many new learnings, and he has been very frank. Dr. Krishna Kumar, I must appreciate that, like his comment about
Thank you, sir.
Favipiravir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, because that is what is necessary. See, today what's happening is even we doctors are not sure what is true and what is commercial.
Yes,
So
sir.
therefore, such sharing, it really helps us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
And
sir.
of course, Cytosorb is costlier. I mean, I wanted to know the cost, but Dr. Rajiv Jain has already clarified it will cost about a couple of lakhs of rupees. But then nothing is cheap.
Yes, sir.
As regards COVID treatment, you don't get
Yes, sir.
anything cheap. So we have to be prepared.
Yes,
And
sir.
of course, it's not for every patient. So
Yes, sir. It's not for every patients.
yeah. So that is understandable. Thank you so much. It was a very nice presentation.
Thank you,
And
sir.
we
Thank you.
appreciate your frankness. Thank you.
Sir, thank you, sir.
Dr. Damodar Lele has joined from Mumbai. Dr. Lele, if you have any question or comments, sir. Or Dr. Tyagraj is there. He religiously attends and he's quite he tells us everything and he recapitulates everything and gives a brief summary of everything in the next before the next episode of our weekly webinar. Dr. Tyagraj, sir. Dr. Tyagraj is from Bangalore. You can unmute yourself here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Sandeep Sharma ji. You are a wonderful topic you have arranged, and we are very much thankful to you. And Dr. Krishna Kumar, one of the best lecture we have heard about this COVID SARS-2. Very good lecture, Dr. Krishna Kumar. I'm
Thank you, sir.
every week and every alternate day we hear this kind of lecture from in Bangalore. And I'm also seeing a lot of cases of COVID also, because I am an orthopedic surgeon. Unfortunately, what happens whenever fever cases comes, because I am here since 42 years of my practice in Bangalore, in Vidyaranapura, and because this is a urban, rural area, and because I am practicing since long time, patients of fever comes to me, and we check and RT-PCR test and all. Most of them are positive. And we take a lot of this one. Your lecture is very good, very good. You have covered everything right from the beginning to the end, and very nice lecture. Thank you very much, and keep it up. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Shanbag, sir. Dr. Shanbag is our past president. He's from Mumbai. Yeah.
Thanks, Sandeep, for a lovely guest lecture. And I echo the sentiments of all the other panelists as far as the quality of the lucid presentation by Dr. Krishna Kumar. Outstanding presentation, making it very simple to understand for us who are non-critical care people. And I think, it will go a long way in helping us to counsel our patients.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Ghanshyam Dulera, he was having some query. Dr. Dulera, can you unmute yourself and you can ask the question? Dr. Ghanshyam?
Yeah, I was wanted to ask basically regarding how many cases of fibrosis are coming back post COVID infection, because in Mumbai 40 to 45 patients, they came to KEM hospital with a pulmonary fibrosis and ILD. So I just wanted to ask Dr. Krishnan.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Actually, a lot of people are coming back, sir, with post-COVID sequelae. Actually, a lot of people are coming with the long-term. They're still hypoxic. They're requiring home oxygen therapy still. They are having problems. We have just started seeing all the post. They are coming back with fibrosis, but so far the pulmonologist, we are not dealing with that. The pulmonologists are thinking of starting with others, monoclonal antibodies like pirfenidone or something like that. They are starting those drugs in very patients who got severe fibrosis. Yes, they are. We are seeing those cases again. Yes, sir. We are definitely seeing those cases.
Dr. Shiva,
Thank you,
sir.
thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Damodar. Dr. Dulera, Dr. Shiva, sir. Yeah, Dr. Shiva is also a past president. He's from Mumbai, and he basically is our mental health consultant, and he takes care of because mental health is very important. Psychosocial health, our psychological health, that is very important. And Dr. Shiva, sir, would you like to have some?
Yeah. No, I just wanted to say the same thing, that Dr. Krishna Kumar presented an excellent presentation. And not only that, he was very frank enough to tell what is what. Because most of the people don't tell us what is what. So thank you, Dr. Krishna Kumar. And thank you, Sandeep, for arranging such a wonderful session.
Thank you, sir. Any other panelists, if they have any question, then they can just ask, or else we will conclude. If you have any question. Hello.
That 6-minute walk and then determining if you're.
Dr. Rajiv, sir, you have to unmute yourself if you're asking something.
I did not get the questions.
Okay, so there's one more choice. Is clarithromycin a good choice for antibiotic?
Clarithromycin. We can give any of the macrolides. Azithro or clarithromycin. We are giving azithromycin because also I got some immunomodulatory properties. We can use clarithromycin also. There is no hard and fast with this. You can use both. Azithro, any of this macrolide, azithro or clarithro. We start with cephalosporins and macrolides to cover atypical cover as well.
So
the question I was asking was regarding, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I was asking about how frequently you're measuring your SpO2, and are you using that 6-minute walk test?
Sir, most of my patients in ICU are not in a state to walk actually, so we are not using 6-minute walk test. We are continuously monitoring the SpO2, sir. And apart from that, we are also monitoring the carbon dioxide, ETCO. Sometimes we connect the ETCO2 also connected to the carbon dioxide also we are monitoring. The time when the carbon dioxide is going up, then we think the patient is going fatigued, and that's the time when we intervene and intubate. As long as the CO2 is okay, we are still managing with HFNC or NIV. So SpO2 and PaO2 are constantly monitored. So we maintain a chart of that to see the trends. Basically, not a single value, but see the trends.
Okay. Another question regarding the case that you presented. Interestingly, CRP was high and procalcitonin was normal. That's what you said. Isn't it unusual?
Yes, so that's what the, if you want to use Procal, sorry, the patient, it is only a viral infection, so the Procal need not be raised. The CRP will be raised, but the Procal need not rise actually. Procal will be raised in bacterial or rickettsial infections and other things, in trauma, sepsis, other things, it can be increased. But it is normal, sir, to find Procal still normal. Even now, I have a patient who last 3 weeks on it. He didn't have a Procal still 0.05. We gave him tocilizumab. We had put him on ECMO also. We decalinated him also. He's doing well. So it is Procal can be remain normal, sir.
All the parameters, which one you would choose? Because people talk a lot about D-dimer as the most sensitive index of severity or the viral load. Which one you would choose amongst all the tests for cytokine storm?
We are using IL-6, sir. If you are having a cytokine storm, we should have IL-6, interleukin 6 levels. Yes, sir.
And how frequently you determine? How frequently you determine IL-6 in the ICU setting?
Sir, somebody who has come with a ARD, sir, initially we are doing the baseline IL-6 to see what is the levels, and if the patient is deteriorating, then we do a repeat after 48 hours. We repeat the IL-6. This is a very expensive test, slightly expensive. So we do it after 48 hours to see the trends basically. If it is.
And did you have any pediatric patients of COVID in a severe stage?
No, sir. So far, I don't know why children are not, nobody's affected so far.
All right. Well, that's good.
Be
Thank you.
thankful.
So basically IL-6, CRP, they are the basic inflammatory markers which we have to even monitor after recovery. And D-dimer, it indicates about the thrombocoagulation, this thromboembolism phenomenon, this coagulation. Yeah. So that also we have to monitor basically to see the inflammation.
We are monitoring. So we monitor FDP, CRP, procalcitonin, and ferritin. Even also ferritin also is monitored in acute phase 14. So that also we monitor prevalence. Because these patients, some of them go into which already mentioned in the thing. Secondary HLH is something we have very high ferritin, high triglycerides. Then is again an option of giving a cytosol option is there in them.
Okay. So, Dr. Krishna Kumar, let me conclude by saying that yes, it was a very good presentation, and all the panelists and the participants, they were enlightened by your presentation. And Madam is clapping, and that is a good gesture on her part to motivate and boost our our concept. And we know that yes, COVID-19 is a challenge for every one of us, and especially for industrial physicians and for occupational physicians. We have conceptualized this particular platform so that we can get connected with the specialists with different topics, and we should be aware of everything, and we should be knowing the latest development, what latest protocols, and because then only we can take care of our patients. We can inform adequately to our management that in our respective industries. And Dr. Kumar, we all from different industries, and most of us, we are medical heads of our respective industries, and keeping in view all these things, we have conceptualized basically this platform, and this is a new way of working for all of us, at least during this COVID pandemic, and this will definitely continue, and this will take care of this gloomy times, and it will create some positive atmosphere among our fellow colleagues so that we are more knowledgeable and more confident about the whole thing. And I thanks all the panelists, all the senior members to attend this particular webinars very religiously, sir. And I thank you all very much. And I thanks all the participants, and especially Dr. Krishna Kumar. During this new ways of working, it is a new gesture from our side, like digitally only we can greet you, and we will send you a certificate of appreciation from our side. And Dr. Krishna Kumar, we thank you very much, and this will be our token of appreciation from our side. And yes, dearth of therapeutic options which you have deliberated very nicely before us. That was great, and thank you very much. And we'll keep in touch. And thank you all, sir. Thank you all panelists, and thank you all the senior members and all the participants. Thank you. Next time we'll come with a new topic next Saturday, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.